I appreciate you being here today, Lieutenant Sargent. Lieutenant Sargent is a paramedic with AFR, or Albuquerque Fire and Rescue, for those that are out of town. Has served over 20 years with the department, and she is here to share her story today. Thank you.
Well, correction, sorry. I've only been with AFR for 13 years.
13 years.
That's okay. Fire service, in the fire service for 26.
There we go. That's where I messed up. Fire service.
Yeah. Hi, I'm glad to be here, and I'm honored to have been asked to participate in this. Listening to Dr. Rosenbaum's presentation, I wish I would have heard this when I was a teenager, but then I wouldn't be really telling my story. It would be much different. A lot of times when I've watched these, there's been maybe one or two incidents that kind of cause different reactions from us to take maybe a wrong path in coping or dealing with different things, but I feel like it's something for me that's happened over the course of my life. It's not one big incident that's contributed to my challenges, but a lot of different incidents and choices throughout my life. And it seemed like the coping mechanisms that I picked up along the way in the beginning were not the healthiest of coping mechanisms. So a little about me. I grew up here in Albuquerque until I was 13, and at that point we moved to, my dad's job moved us to a small desert town in California, in Barstow. If you've taken I-40, you ended there. Very small, not a lot to do. My parents, both of them, were very religious, which one of the coping mechanisms that I was introduced to was praying about everything, which is neither good or bad, but it's sometimes not the most effective, or I found for me it wasn't the most effective. My dad was a deacon in the Catholic Church, so there was some pressure in that respect. But I learned as I went on and I lived longer that he was probably the most spiritual person I've ever met, which turns out helped me out later in life, later on in finding other mechanisms to cope. I had two older brothers, and one of them, when he was 18, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So that was one of the big, I guess, traumas. That was kind of a chronic trauma in our lives as a family. And growing up in a small desert town, thing to do was drink. We went out drinking, you know, after football games, whenever. That was what we did out in the desert. And that quickly became something that I used to cope with different things and wasn't even realizing it. I think anybody that maybe has a first drink doesn't think, oh, this is going to be my coping mechanism or for any time period. So that was ingrained pretty early in. And after high school and the beginning of college, I dabbled in some other substances, which those weren't healthy either. And in addition to my brother being diagnosed as schizophrenic, in the time period of, I think I would say 7 years, is from high school till about the time I was 21, I knew of about 15 people in my age group that had passed away, which is a large amount coming from a small town. And they were all of various reasons. And it was, when I was in college, there was two friends that died within a 2-month span of each other. One was suicide and one was in the military. And that's when I think I dove pretty heavily into alcohol and other substances and became very depressed. To the point of, I had SI, I had ideations, I had a plan. And by the grace of God, it was just the people that were surrounding me, the friends that I had, that they had no idea what was going on with me, but they, just them being there, was enough to help pull me out of that. And also that I did not want to add more to my parents' plate when they have to deal with my brother, and then to have that. That's just something I just couldn't wrap my head around doing to them. So I was able to get out of that through a period of time, and it wasn't like I decided to; it just happened. It wasn't can describe that there was a point where I'm going to get help. This is going to happen. I'm going to be better. It was just who I was around that helped me do that. And I knew that there was more to me than using substances. I distinctly have memories of coming home from class and opening the fridge and reaching in and grabbing a beer, and in my head I'm thinking, this isn't right. This isn't what you should be doing. So that inner voice was, I didn't listen. I knew that it wasn't the right thing to do, but it's what I knew. So that's what I fell back on. But I knew I could do better. And I thought, okay, what is it? And at this point I was in junior college. I was at Long Beach City College. I thought, what is it that I can do that can really change things for me in a drastic way? And I thought, well, there's the military. So that was one thing that I was tossing around. And as I was tossing that around, there was at the school, there was a recruiter for Long Beach State. I was going to transfer to Long Beach State. There was a recruiter for, they were recruiting for the rowing team. And so I started asking questions, and, found out these people get up at 4:30 in the morning and they push the body to the limits, and they're out on the water rowing. And I thought, you know what, let's do that. Let's try that. Let's try that. And that's what I did. And it was the most frustrating thing in the world at the very beginning, because you have 8 people in a boat, 7 other people trying to do the same thing, and we don't know what to do. So it was slightly organized chaos in the beginning. And I had been a gymnast before that. So as a gymnast, you're in control of what you're doing. Your movements are your movements. But if somebody in front of me is doing the exact same thing I am, or I'm not doing the exact same thing they are, the boat is flip-flopping all over. So it was very, very challenging in a lot of different ways. But through that, I found the discipline I was looking for. That's what I was looking for: discipline and structure. And I made, beginning the very first day, I'm sitting around in the boathouse, and the coach says, "Look around. These people will be your friends for the rest of your life." And I'm like, "There's no way." There's one girl that was chatting as fast as she could, this blonde, and she was like, "There's no way I'm friends with that girl." And she ended up being the maid of honor at my wedding. So it impacted my life in a huge way. And it pulled me out of the funk I was in. And so, not to say that like any drinking stopped, because it just kind of took on a different animal when you're on a sports team in college, but there was a different focus now. There was a focus in school and a focus in rowing, and something that I really loved. So in that process, I thought I was going to, in college, be a police officer. Sorry. But after rowing, I was like, and taking some criminology classes, because I was going to major in criminology and decided not to, that I decided that I wanted to be in something that was team oriented, that was going to push my body physically, push me mentally. And I happened to be working with somebody whose husband was a firefighter in Pasadena at the time, and got to talking to him. Ended up playing softball with 2 people. He was one of them, and I decided the fire service is what I wanted to do. So that's how I ended up going towards the fire service. It was more what I was looking for. And kind of like, starting out when take that first drink, you don't know what that's going to entail. Well, same with the fire service. You're like, oh, that's what I want to do, to save lives, I want to help people. But there's so much more to it. So I tested throughout Southern California and other states like Colorado and Washington, and and I went through a fire academy, a part-time fire academy in California. And then I was a volunteer with the city of Pasadena. They typically would hire their auxiliaries, but they were just in a hiring freeze. So I decided I needed to look for work as a firefighter elsewhere. So I applied to, like I said, I was testing everywhere, and I decided to apply to a military base. My mom worked on a military base. She's like, why don't you try with the departments on bases? And I sent resumes out to everywhere. This is before you applied online. That's how old I am. You can actually mail them to the different bases. And I got a call back from a small base in Illinois, and they wanted to hire me. So I always told myself I would not turn down a paid firefighting job after all the testing I had done. So I went and I took that job. And so I moved from Southern California to a town of 1,700 people in Illinois. It was a huge, extreme, drastic change. And once again, there was, in that little town, there were more bars than there were churches. So not knowing anybody, you know, what am I going to do? I'm going to go drink. So I kind of dealt with that extreme change in that way until I got another job as an EMT. So I was basically just working part-time. And then ended up getting hired at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And I went there, and it was a much bigger department, much busier. Really enjoyed myself there, and I met my oldest son's dad prior to that in California, and he happened to be stationed there. So, long story short, still drinking, maybe not as much to cope because things were better. Like I wasn't depressed, and then I got pregnant with my oldest son, and I stopped altogether, of course, throughout pregnancy and breastfeeding. And then we moved to Albuquerque, back to Albuquerque. So I kind of went in a big circle around the United States. Never thought I'd end up back here in a million years. But 20 years later, I ended up back here. And that's, I think, actually before that, when I was at Fort Bragg, when I was dealing with, you know, I haven't touched much on like personal relationships and the stresses that come with that. And within those stresses, we still fall back on the same coping mechanisms, at least I did. So it was, you know, drinking. But when I did get pregnant, I wasn't doing that. So things really didn't go that well, and they weren't going well. In some days better, some days not. And I know that there was a time that I got in an argument with my son's dad, and going back to how I was raised in our coping mechanisms, in my family, we didn't talk much. We didn't talk at all about feelings. We didn't talk at all about disappointment or change. If I had done something wrong, my punishment was the silent treatment and dirty looks and being mad dogged. It was just something that wasn't in the repertoire of my mom and dad. Like being able to sit down and go, you know what, this is what you did. This is how I feel about it. How do you feel about it? That just didn't happen. So after an argument with my son's dad, I, silent treated for 3 days. Is what I gave him. And he showed up at the fire station and he said, yeah, that's not going to happen. Because you're not going to do this to my child. You're not going to do this to me. And it was like in my head, I was like, what do you mean? And I couldn't even wrap my head around that there was another way. There's another way to cope. There's another way to communicate. There's another way to do stuff. So within that, we went to some classes, relationship classes that the Army was offering at the time, because he was in the Army. And that kind of was the door that opened for me to step into like just having a different idea of how to do things and how to cope with things. And we actually saw a counselor, so that was good. And when we moved to Albuquerque, I got hired by Kirtland, and he was getting out of the Army. The same problems were there, you know, and the drink, mine and his drinking were still there, so that fed into it. But we went to another counselor, so that was like I think, a turning point, a huge turning point for me, that made me realize that there are more ways to do something. You know, there's a lot of ways to cope, and there's a lot of ways to handle problems and issues. So that led down a road that I'm still on that path, finding new ways. It gave us, it just gave us direction. So that relationship ended. It was not in a bad way. It was actually a very good way. But as time went on, the dealing with stuff still was coped with by drinking. And I ended up in another relationship that was very unhealthy. And that just promoted more of that. And in the process of that, with my oldest son's dad, there was things turned bad. There was custody battle, there was time sharing battle. And it wasn't a good situation. I mourn the loss of that relationship and that friendship. It was really hard for me. And around that time, I also had in the toxic relationship or the not good relationship, we both had an addiction, or we both had bad coping mechanisms. And at one point it was proposed to me, if you stop drinking, I'll stop doing this. And I said, done. And I didn't drink for another 3 years. But that didn't stop. That doesn't stop somebody else's behavior. So it still was not a good situation. And at the same time, I had some issues with a back injury at work. So I was dealing with that. I was dealing with being in a bad relationship situation. And I didn't have a coping mechanism. So I fell back into depression, more SI, more thoughts of suicide, because I didn't know how to get out of that situation. And I wasn't coping with it in any way. And I was seeing a counselor again, started seeing the same counselor I saw when I first came to Albuquerque. Since I wasn't dealing with it in a healthy way, I even at one point had resorted to cutting. I don't think I've ever said that out loud to anybody. And my counselor at the time said, she says, is it like you're trying to release the pain or feel the pain on the outside that you're feeling on the inside? And I was like, yes, that's exactly it. And it wasn't something that lasted. I think it was almost something like an experiment to see, can I relieve this somehow? So I did cope. I did find another way to cope, but I knew it wasn't something that I wanted to do. So I continued counseling. There was some meds involved, antidepressants. And then not long after that, my dad died. And it was a completely unexpected death. He was 70 years old. He worked out 3 times a week. He ran the other 2 times a week. He was in the yard every day. And he came home and told my mom, or you went and worked in the yard and said, Mom, or you told my mom, I'm going to go lay down for a nap. And you didn't wake up. And so that was just like not expected at all. So in that process, I went home to be with my mom for a while, and dealing with his back pain, dealing with these other things. And she said, why don't you take, your dad used to take these for his knees. His knees were really bad. She took one of these a day for his knees. And she take it. So I didn't think twice about it. I was not thinking, what is this? I wasn't a paramedic yet. I wasn't aware enough yet. But I started taking them. I'm like, that was great, So I went through the day, and then the more I took, I really felt great. Well, it was generic Percocet, and did not realize that I had just pretty much opened the door to be addicted to narcotics. Went to my doctor, told him, about the back pain. And I think I may have already been there for back pain for the work thing, but and he ended up prescribing me the same thing. And so now I'm coping again. I'm coping, and I'm coping in another unhealthy way. And I found myself not just coping, but taking enough so that I could feel really good, not just get rid of the pain. And I knew exactly when I could call for a refill, how many I could take before I would feel the pain again. So yeah, didn't even realize it, and got myself hooked on those. And then I got pregnant with my youngest child, and I told my doctor what I was taking, whatever medications I was on. And he said, you can keep taking those, but your baby's going to be born addicted to pain meds, and he's going to go through withdrawals. And so at that point, that day, I stopped cold turkey. And it was 3 of the hardest weeks of my life. It was really difficult. It was very painful. But I knew that it wasn't for me. It was for him. It was for this child that wasn't born yet. And so that was the end of that. And went on, had my child, and 9 months after that, well, not too long after, probably like 4 to 6 months. He was 4 to 6 months old, I think. I filed for divorce. And then I applied to Albuquerque Fire Academy. I'm really grateful for the time with the Department of Defense, with military jobs, with Kirtland Air Force Base Fire Department. Grateful for their education. There was a lot of certifications and education I got through them, but there was not a lot happening, and I felt like I was dying a slow death there. I was not doing what I wanted to do. I was not doing the job I wanted to do. So, and I had applied some years prior to the academy and didn't make it through the first part of the testing. And this time, I was just complaining about my job at Kirtland as I'm walking down the hall in the station. One of the guys like, hey, they're doing another lateral class at AFB. Maybe I should. So I applied and passed that test, passed that test, passed that test. So the doors just kept opening for me. And I got in. And at the age of the first week in the academy, I turned 41 years old. I can't even say it. I turned 41 years old, and I had a 9-month-old and an 8-year-old at home, and I was going through a divorce. And in the academy, at that age, everything hurts. And I had a bad knee already, and ended up going to employee health once for it, and I was struggling going up. You know, we ran the sand dunes back then, the old days, academy, and I was struggling. I was really struggling, and one of the instructors told me, you know, you say Lieutenant Sergeant, sounds funny, but told me, Cadet Sergeant, you need to stay down here at the bottom. You don't let your class go without you, and you need to figure out how you're going to deal with this. I don't know what you're going to do, but you need to figure it out. And he took off after my class, and I sat down there, and it's really hard for me to watch my class or my team go without me. And I sat down there, and I stood down there, and he's like, I thought to myself, he's right. He's absolutely right. I need to figure this out. And I got home, and, you know, I realized that I wake up in pain. I go through the day in pain. I go to sleep with pain. That pain is my companion. It's my constant companion. And just accept it. Let it be your friend. It's always there with you. So instead of pushing against it and trying to get rid of it and trying to just bitch and complain about and feeling bad because it's there all the time, just wrap your arms around it and be friends with it. And it sounds really crazy, but after that, the next day, there was like a lightness to the way I went about my day. I knew it was there. It didn't change that it was there, but it changed how I felt about it. And it kind of lifted some weights off my shoulders when it came to that. And I looked back at the academy. I remember my captain coming to the station because the academy staff would check in with you every so often. And we got to talking about relationships and stuff and about divorces. And I told him, I said, I think the academy saved my life. As hard as it was, it saved my life. And yeah, just the radical acceptance of it. And pushing myself through something physically and emotionally and mentally, and just getting up every day and doing it, as hard as it was, I was proving to myself that I was strong enough. I was showing myself that I could do it. So after that, there's, you know, relationship stuff still didn't go away. Now I have a child with this person, and so I still went to counseling, and been in ever since, pretty much. I think now it's more like a maintenance thing, but went to see a different counselor, and as years went on, I got exposed to different modalities in counseling and therapy. And one of the ones that we used was EMDR, and it changed my life. It really changed things and how I saw things and how I felt about things, and dealing with things that I did not even know were there. The way I like to explain it is like there's doors that open when you do EMDR, and there was a door that opened that I had no idea I had an issue with a certain thing, which was my first son's father, and dealing with that loss. And I didn't realize that was something that was weighing on me. So there's a lot of good things that came from that. Other things that I have experienced, gone through some Reiki, massage has been therapeutic, just getting outside. And within my own counselor and with AFR, there was, through our union, we had some meditation and mindfulness classes that totally opened up doors that I never thought would be there or would be so beneficial. And just had different sources presented to me, and then within that, I also started seeking out different things, different coping mechanisms, different ways of doing things more healthy. And you know, we talk about traumatic events in our job, things that affect us, And I think that within our profession, there's a lot of different personalities. We're mainly typing, right? We want to control things. We want to fix things. And that's not always the case. That's not always something we can do. So accepting things for what they are sometimes is the best that we can do. But I always tell people, a lot of people ask me, how do you deal with seeing people die on a regular basis? And for me, I tell them I don't have this might not sound good, but I don't have a problem seeing people die. But I have a problem seeing how people live. We all are going to die. We don't have that choice. We maybe have choice sometimes in how it might happen, by what we get involved in, but we have a choice on how we live, I think. And that's now I work in the heart program within our department, which is a community EMS program, and we work with people who are repeat 911 callers and a lot of substance abusers, and it's hard. This is the hardest job I've ever had in this position, and that's what we see on a regular basis. So find more ways to cope, but it's good because it opens my eyes to different things, and it opens my eyes to, like Dr. Rosenbaum was saying, to gratitude and how grateful I am for having the life I have. But I realize in all that I'm resilient when it comes to traumatic events on the job. But I'm not as resilient as when it comes to things that are close to me. And to be more aware of that, that when something is happening within my own circle, it's going to be more challenging for me. So that leads me to, in January of 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I felt like, well, I went through surgery. I went through 4.5 months of chemo, went through radiation, and I went through physical therapy for a number of months for recovery from treatment. And I felt like so much of what I dealt with earlier in my life, or in my life up to that point, pretty much was preparing me for that diagnosis. When I was diagnosed, I had just kind of an inner knowing that I was going to be okay. I was going to be fine. And the hardest part not the hardest part, but in the beginning, the hard part was telling other people. Because when other people heard what I was going to go through, just how they felt about it, and their sadness and their anxiety about it was harder for me than me being in my own shoes. But looking back, I found that I realized that there's a lot of layers that led to learning how to pivot and learning how to adapt and learning how to overcome, and knowing that there's another way to cope. I started out with some really unhealthy ways, but that didn't mean that I had to stay with it. That didn't mean I had to stick with that. That was working, sort of, but maybe causing other problems. And even with healthy coping mechanisms, like Dr. Rosenbaum was saying, that just because it works for this one thing doesn't mean that there's not another better coping mechanism to help with something else. So being open-minded to what is available, I think, for me, has been a big lesson in all of this. And I found that going through the diagnosis and the treatment of cancer, that it's somebody who's a friend of mine whose husband also deals with cancer, said this is the gift that you never want to get, because it opens your mind to living life and not just going day to day and being on the hamster wheel, and maybe taking that coping mechanism or that thing that makes you happy and changing it up to do something that's different and that's better and that is new. when the state, this was all, cancer treatment was all going on during COVID. So when the state shut down again, I had taken my son to an archery lesson, and I decided I wanted to do something different, and I was going to pick something that was, I can do in my backyard. I don't have to go anywhere. I can spend some money here and then just keep doing that and keep getting practicing. And I found that there was a short mindfulness and meditation in archery. And so I started shooting a bow. And as time went on and I took a few more lessons, I was asked, are you going to put in for a tag? Or are you going to put in to hunt? I've never hunted before in my life. And so, but after my cancer diagnosis, I tell people that anything that is remotely interesting, I'm going to do. Yes, I'm going to do that. So I did. And I was still feeling really crappy. I'm still trying to recover from but I managed to put myself in a position. Well, first of all, I drew 2 tags, and then I knew it was real. I had to put myself in a position so to be ready to do this, and it was a big challenge. And I've noticed that over my life, I meet like challenges that are unwanted with challenges that I choose to do, and that was the challenge that I chose to do. And I get it now. I get it why people go out and hunt. It's not just about chasing an animal. There's something about it that just fills my soul. The whole process of it. I'm thinking about private hunting. But it's just a new thing, you know. So what I've learned through everything I just told you was that there's always going to be discomfort involved throughout our life, and that pushing against it or forcing something does not bring peace as much as whatever it is. And there's always other ways of doing things when it comes to cooking, and it's just finding what works for me or for you at that time. And for the difficult situations, I've found myself asking myself now, and I think a lot of this comes from mindfulness and meditation, just all the things I've done, but I asked myself, well, what is it that I'm supposed to learn from this? Because I think that every difficult situation is a learning opportunity. So what is it? Because if it's not a learning opportunity, it's just a difficult situation. So why can't I get something out of this? So what am I supposed to learn from this? And then the next thing would be like, okay, how am I going to do this? And all of that has made me definitely look at life differently. And I think that it's a continual evolving process. It's never going to stop. It shouldn't stop. We're never going to reach a point where everything is perfect. Because sometimes we'll plateau in one strategy and then we'll move on. Yeah, so that's my story.
Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to ask right away. When you had your 2 draws, did you get them?
So I didn't get it out, but it was one of the most amazing experiences that we've been through. And in that, I realized how far I could push myself now. Like I didn't know what my limits were after cancer treatment, but in 5 minutes we hiked about 38 miles at elevation changes that were anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 feet at 9,000 to 10,000 feet. So I was really, it's just like this, as tired as I was, I got so much out of it because I not proved to myself, but I acknowledged how strong I really am, like how much I've come back. And I did.
Nice job.
So for the first time, I feel very fortunate very fortunate to have had that experience. Yeah.
And we'll open it up for anyone that is on the network. If you guys just want to either unmute or you can type it into the chat and you can ask any questions.
While we wait for people.
Hey, Jeff, I got something.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Go ahead, Mark.
Hey, Lieutenant, I just want to say thank you for sharing your story. Absolutely amazing, a true warrior, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Shannon put in, thank you for sharing so candidly, Sargent. Your story is your story is inspirational and a model for what resilience is. And then she has to hop off onto another call, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is Niels Rosenbaum. I agree. That was great. Thank you so much for being so open and honest. It's really impressive. And everything you've gone through is, and not just gone through, but thrived through. It's really, it is a model. I guess I had two sort of questions, very unrelated. One was, could you tell a little bit about EMDR, specifically how you experienced it? And then I'll ask my next question after. So one of the
Yeah, EMDR, for me, there's, I think, 3 different ways to experience it. You can do it by sight, by hearing, and by tactile. So I had the tactile, like they vibrate like they're going back and forth. My experience with it was that I was explaining as, it's not that it took any memory away of the situation, but it took the edge off. Like when I would think about the situation, I wouldn't become really emotional about it. It would be like, oh yeah, that was really hard. Yeah, you know, it was kind of more matter of fact.
interesting.
So it took the edge off of the memory of whatever was the issue and whatever was the challenge.
Oh,
So-
interesting. Okay, perfect. So question, well, I'll open it up if anybody else has questions before I ask question number 2. Okay, so question number 2 is, you used the phrase radical acceptance. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I had read a little bit about that, and it basically, it's just, to me, what it means is accepting something that you would never think of accepting. Like giving into whatever it is that you're trying to push against, or trying to change, or trying to not be sad about, or whatever. Just to, like I said, the pain in the academy, to wrap your arms around it and accept it for what it is.
Yeah, not fighting. It's like the quicksand analogy. If you're in quicksand, the worst thing you can do is try to struggle and fight. You better just sort of let it go.
That's right.
That's great.
Let's slowly take you.
Let it slowly take. Right, gotta float on top. Or those Chinese finger traps. They still call it. That's right. The more you struggle against.
The tighter we get.
Yeah.
How did you come to terms with accepting what came to you? Like, I feel like, again, like as a type A personality, we try to either control it or we try to change it. So how did you decide just to accept it?
It wasn't until the academy. It wasn't until like that epiphany in the Sundance that I have to make a change, and everything I was doing was not working. Don't get me wrong, like not everything that comes my way, I'm not wrapping my arms around everything.
Yeah.
It's like you know, I still run into like, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try this door. I'm gonna try this door, and this door's not opening, and then it's like standing back and going, okay, you need to accept whatever that is. It doesn't come automatically with some things. So, like I said, it's constantly evolving. It's like a practice. I practice all the time. I'm not an expert at it at all, but yeah, it's just, I think you know, when things aren't working out right, or things just don't feel right, or you don't feel good about something, it's stop. And stand back and be mindful of whatever it is, like Dr. Rosenbaum said, acknowledge it. And, you know, maybe there is another way of doing it, or maybe it's just accepting it for what it is. So, but that's like, I have to sift through those things all the time. It's not like an automatic, oh, I accept this.
All right. Especially those doors. I mean, you guys
Yeah,
have stuff to
try
break
before
it
you
down.
cry. Try before you cry, and then you try to bust it open. If you don't, then you look for another door.
Or a window.
Exactly.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions before we wrap up? I am not seeing anybody. If you have any other comments or questions, again, either for Dr. Rosenbaum or for Lieutenant Sargent, you guys can always email it to us, and we can get those either the comments or the questions answered for you. Melissa, I have no idea when is SCION next month? I know it's the first Thursday, but I don't remember what the first Thursday is. Usually I look at that, and I did not look at that today.
It's gonna be November 4th.
November 4th. So November 4th, we will be having SCION again. We are looking for presenters. So if you know anyone or if you would like to present, we would always appreciate it and are always, again, looking for people to present. You can either email myself, Dr. Rosenbaum, or Melissa Schultz, and we can get you guys hooked up that way. Miguel also just wrote in, great job, Lieutenant.
Or it's Miguel's buddy,
Or it's
actually.
Miguel's buddy. Yeah. Awesome. Well, with that, again, we appreciate it. We appreciate your story and your candidness and your resiliency and everything that we were able to learn from it. And so we will see you guys November 4th.